we're going to start, as was originally intended, with Alan Lowrie, talking about Byblis of Australia. I'm very glad he's willing to do 2 lectures, and he's very flexible in when he does it.
Thank you, Marcel. Good morning, people. How are your heads? This talk this morning, I'm just going to run you through the Byblis of Australia to show you what the differences are between things, the problems we're having with conservation. No, I won't say that. Okay. I've got to be careful what I say because I get hot under the collar sometimes about certain things. But you'll see why in a minute. Okay, we're back to Western Australia again, and as I talked about, that we had this up the other day on Google Earth. Here we can see that the wheat belt has creamed a lot of sites. The coastal areas also creamed. These bits here are forest, and these are being logged now. We have a situation in Western Australia where they clear fell trees because what they're after is wood chips, and they don't care whether the tree is 100 mil in diameter or something you can't put your arms around. They go in, they saw them down, they cut the upper branches off, they take the log, they debark the log, and they put it through a chipper. They pay their royalties per cubic metre of chips, and the forest is ruined. If I took some of you people with me on that day that they were dropping this tree, and we ran around with our secateurs and made 12 herbarium collections of fruits and flowers, etc., to export those herbarium specimens to California or to Kew, I need a $150 Australian permit from our national capital to get them out of Australia because they're of Australian origin. The trunk of the tree does not need a permit because the guy that's chopping it up for chips is going about his rightful, lawful business. So how silly is the system? I'm off the bandwagon now, right. Byblis, we have 2 perennial Byblis species. The first one is Byblis gigantea. Gigantea goes into dormancy after its flowering, its seeding, etc. It slowly dies back as the summer period gets hotter and hotter, and it dies to its roots. The following year, when the first rains arrive, it will put up new growth. And here is a typical Byblis coming out of dormancy. This is one of the characters of gigantea, but I'll show you the character of its kissing cousin, lamellata, in a minute. A close-up of Byblis. And the great thing about where I live is, from that one shot, there is little red dots around here. They're Drosera nitidulas. There's 3 species of Stylidium in the shot as well. So it's not just one species in an area, it's a whole ecosystem. This is a typical Byblis gigantea location east of Perth. These are winter wet swamp flats. In the summer they are bone dry. White Byblis, extremely rare, and all the time I've been going into the bush, I've seen 3 white Byblis gigantea. A close-up of the white flower there. I'm getting a bit old these days and I need 3 sets of glasses to see. But these little fellas here, these are the ones you pick up from your local pharmacy of 2-powered, 3-powered, 4-powered. I have a whole set, and I find it's quite easy in the field to look at fine details by using these little John Lennon glasses. I highly recommend them. A couple of years ago, I was coming across seed capsules that were being predated on by something that chews a hole in the side and actually gets into the seed and chomps it. Now, whether or not it's a native species or it's an introduced invasive, I'm not sure, but this is one of the problems with the gigantea populations around Perth. They all seem to be getting attacked by this little grub. Here is another habitat in the metropolitan area of Perth, in an area that I used to call Cannington Swamp. Many years ago in CPN, I wrote an article about Canning Vale or Canning River rest in peace, because I knew then, this was probably 30 years ago, that it was going to go under. And bit by bit they've been chipping away at this area for urbanisation, and I'm sad to report that this particular location in Canning Vale, which held some of the most beautiful different colours of Byblis, the bulldozer driver takes the first swipe. They dump rubble, etc. onto the site, and you can see here the Byblis that have been scratched off with a bulldozer are trying to fight their way out and do their thing. Help me. Get that flower out, get it pollinated, get some seed, throw it out, save me. You see suburbia just here. It was one of the superb clones that lived in that area. It's like a little prairie dog coming up out of an ant mound. That's the prairie dog. Traffic going past, a bus stop. And that's what it's all about. I think we all know that one. This land in metropolitan area of Perth is valuable. This block here would probably be worth $9 or $10 million. That there is the part that I'm talking about, just there. Byblis used to grow all through here, all through here, all through there. This has been creamed by housing, as you can see. A set of factories has gone on to the original Byblis spot. That there is still a bit of original, but this is an old Google shot. That's actually gone. That's gone the way of these properties here. So that'll be a little industrial area when finished. So it's sad to say that Byblis gigantea, down on the sand plains of Perth, is slowly becoming extinct. Now, the plant is not extinct. It does grow in another area where there's plenty of them. But as far as the metropolitan area populations are concerned, these are going under fast. Then we go to its cousin, Byblis lamellata. This grows about 160 kilometres further north than the most northerly Byblis gigantea population. And there's no Byblis in between. So we have down near Perth, Byblis gigantea, 160k of nothing. Then we break into an area of northern sand plains with heathland plants, etc. And this is where lamellata lives. Again, this is under threat for farming. Wheat, sheep and cattle. And with Google Earth, that shot's taken about there, you can see all the farm being chewed out of the northern sand plains. Byblis lamellata does not die back to its roots in dormancy. It loses all its main leaves and just remains as a bunch of sticks. And it's from those sticks above the soil, the following year when the rains arrive, that new innovations will arise from that, new growth, new inflorescences, etc. So the difference between the two in their life form or the cycle is Byblis gigantea going below the ground to fleshy white roots. This guy here goes back to a stick, and it's very rare that you actually see a plant coming up from the white roots of lamellata. It tends to regenerate a bit of trunk. Lamellata is extremely variable in petal size, petal width, colour of flower. It's all the same species, but as far as we're concerned, we're into cultivation, and in our collections we like to have a white one, a cream one, a dark pink one, etc. We have all the colours of the rainbow in this group. Even not a pure white, but a bit of a cream one there. And that's a typical mature Byblis lamellata. That's approximately to my belt in height. It's acting more like a shrub than a herb. Another shot of lamellata. For those who don't understand how to pollinate any of the Byblis, whether the annuals, tropical annuals, or the perennials, the business end consists of anthers, 5 of them, with a little pore hole at its tip. It has a stigmatic portion here. The deal is they're buzz pollinated. An insect coming in and its buzzing wings send the dust bit by bit out of the anthers onto the insect, and that in turn gets from the insect onto the stigmatic portion. So as he goes from one flower to the next, he's covered in this one's pollen, this one's pollen, this one's pollen, and some of that pollen is coming off and landing on the stigmatic area. So they're out-crossing. Back in the old days, to get pollen out of these, we found that you could use a tuning fork, and you could bang it on the table and get it vibrating and touch these anthers here, and it would release pollen. I have seen on the net guys that have rigged up little electric motors that vibrate so they can get the pollen out of it. But the easiest way is quite simple. You take your thumb and pointer finger, you grab the bottom petal, you take the label out of its pot, and you flick the anthers up. The pollen goes onto your thumb, and you run around putting your thumb with the pollen on it onto the stigmatic portions of the other flowers. It's a piece of cake. Australia is a large land. It is huge. A lot of people who don't know much about our country know it's an island, so they're thinking that it's rather small. But really, Australia, from my home state of Western Australia, Perth on the coast here, to fly to Sydney on this coast takes 5 hours. To fly from Perth to Darwin takes me 4 hours. I can go from Perth to Bali for a holiday in 3 hours. And they're not propeller-driven planes, they're jet-powered. It is huge, the country is huge. And from the very bottom, in the Tasmanian, Victorian regions, we have cold, snow-type situation areas. As we move further up the line to where I live in Perth, the weather, the temperatures, etc., can be likened to what Mediterranean climate around the Mediterranean produces. And as we get a little bit higher, we get into our desert regions, all these parts here, due to lack of rain. But they're not like the Sahara Desert. They're not bare sand dunes. They still have a flora, but it's short, it's sharp, some a little bit succulent, but it's still got a flora. So it's not really a desert, it's more semi-arid country. The monsoons up here produce what the people in Southeast Asia get, and that is basically 2 seasons. They get a wet season and a dry season. Although us from European stock still want to use the seasons of Europe, and it doesn't quite work for Australia, especially in the northern regions. The Aboriginal people had 6 seasons, not 4. and it went something like this. By the end of November, the ground is bone dry. Then there's a build-up, the humidity gets higher, clouds start arising, occasional shower here. Then by Christmas, it's raining cats and dogs. And it does that for January and February, and then it ceases and becomes more spasmodic. But in the meantime, it's left water laying all over the ground through the country. And it's in these puddles and films of water is where the carnivorous plants that we love have taken up residence. Then by the time we get to about June, there's still moisture on the ground, but it's starting to shut down. July, it's getting a little bit worse. August, September, October, dry grass, not much happening, ready for the next build-up, November. The reason being is the monsoons spinning off the equator only get to certain regions of the north of Australia. So consequently we have a monsoon climate, a wet and dry climate for this part of the world. The dry areas with less water are the semi-arid countries, parts of our country. Down the bottom in the Mediterranean areas we're getting weather patterns coming up from the Antarctic, and that's watering the bottom of Australia. This is a typical habitat after the wet in March. There's puddles all over the place, even places where there's not puddles, the soil is damp. This particular location along the shoreline here is where the tiniest flowering carnivorous plant was discovered by another team, that is Utricularia simonsii, and I had discovered it on the other side of Australia in Queensland. And we had, myself and my colleague Dr. John Conran from the Adelaide University, had the paper ready to go. John attended a conference like this and presented the paper that we were going to publish for Utricularia simonsii. And when he got there, he found that the guys in Darwin had also found it over in the Northern Territory, and they were ready to go to press. So what we did, we combined our forces and we published the species after the original discoverer, a friend of mine by the name of Paul Simmons. But this is a typical habitat for Byblis aquatica. So down south, we've got two perennial species. Around Perth, we've got Gigantea. Above that, up to around Kalbarri, we've got Lamellata. Then we've got nothing until we hit the Kimberley. And the Kimberley starts officially at Broome there, that part there. That line there is, all that is Western Australia, that is the Northern Territory, that is South Australia, this bit here and above is Queensland, then we have New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. But the Kimberley, when we talk of the Kimberley, it's from Broome across there, up to there and all those parts. And this is where, let's just go back a bit, the Kimberley and this part of the Northern Territory are similar. And I first discovered this in the Northern Territory, a Byblis floating in water. It's actually tethered to the ground. Its major axis, its main stem, floats, and the business end, flowers, leaves, etc., float erect on the water surface. And as the seed pods are matured, they drop the seed immediately. One of the characters we use in the tropical Byblis group is we need coarse characters, good coarse characters to identify a species. And what John and myself have come up with is the anthers are shorter than the filaments. The stalk of the anthers here is physically longer than the anthers. We have two species that have this characteristics. That's Byblis lindiflora, which you'll see in a minute, and this beastie here, Byblis aquatica. The other part of this little identification character is if the anthers are as long as or longer than the supporting filament, then you're in the Byblis filifolia complex. The typical species. These little things here are blister-like arrangements full of moisture. When the pedicel or the flower is pollinated, these start growing and bend the pedicel and the new maturing capsule away from the business part that's still active. Open flowers, new leaves. It's called a pulvinus. Every Byblis, including the perennials, has it. But the problem with it is not a consistent and good character to use in taxonomic situations, which is my world. I have to provide a description that when someone in the future finds a plant, and when they read the description, it will best describe that plant. And the problem with the pulvini is you can go on expedition to the Kimberley and the plants are just starting to flower. We take them, we press them for herbaria, and there's no pulvini to be found on them. It's only if we go late to the Kimberley, non-traditional times, where we use helicopters to do it, that you will see these sort of things in the field. Of course, in cultivation, if you manipulate the flowers and pollinate them, you can come out every day with your Wheaties and see what's going on. But it is not a good, consistent character for taxonomic use. And there's nothing unusual about it. This pulvinus, the pulvini in plants is well known, and in Byblis, they're on all Byblis species, and they're even on a few Stylidium species. This is what I'm talking about. This has been tethered here. This is where the plant started. So we've got bone dry ground, the first rains have come, and we've got a film of water. The seed has germinated, it's doing its thing. In the meantime, it's rained again, so we haven't just got a millimetre of water, we've now got 2 millimetres of water. And eventually it gets to the stage where you get quite a depth of water. So what it does, it grows out of the water with its business end, and eventually it gets to the stage where it can't stand up anymore, it flops over, and its main stem acts as buoyancy and keeps the business end above the water safely. It can still display flowers, be pollinated, and drop seed into the water where it will be dispersed all over the habitat. Again, there's a side shot to see that Aquatica, like Lindiflora, which will come up in a minute, the anthers are shorter than the filaments. And that character can be picked up in most cases even with the worst collected squash specimen. I first discovered Aquatica in the Northern Territory. So far, I have not found it in the Kimberley, but lo and behold, it does go the other way. I found it in far North Queensland. And this is probably 50 kilometres down from the very sharp tip bit we call Cape York Peninsula. And this is not set up. This is a typical shot of our Byblis aquatica with the Utricularia uliginosa growing there. And we've even got an Nepenthes rowanei coming in here. The beautiful thing about Australia is that when you get into the right conditions, you're not dealing with one species in a herb field, you're dealing with many. Another shot of Aquatica. Same again, and you see the leaves here of uliginosa. And like everywhere, the waters recede. It goes back to a mud type situation, but they will carry on pumping out flowers, getting pollinated, making seed until they can do it no more because it's too dry. These guys, because they're annuals, they've got to get the seed stock out there on the ground to ensure that their life form continues to the next season. The trouble with carnivorous plants is they're small and you've got to get down on the ground. And when you get down on the ground like this, we've got these things called ticks. And they can be a match head in size up to your thumbnail in size. They inject something into you so you don't know they're there, and then they bore into your skin in a clockwise fashion and then start sucking your blood. And the next thing you know, 3 days later, you've got a grape hanging off your back or the back of your leg, and the grape is full of blood. There's no chemical to spray to keep them at bay. I've tried everything known to man, but it does not work. So what I do at the end of every day is I strip off and I get in front of a mirror and check myself for ticks. And to get a tick off, you don't go squeezing the body because you'll squeeze its fluids into your system and you're in big trouble. You grab hold of its head with tweezers and you pull him out with an anti-clockwise turn. He's trying to screw in clockwise, you pull him out anti-clockwise. And by doing that, you don't have a great deal of problem with them. But as soon as you lay down, you'll get 30 or 40 ticks on you, no problems whatsoever. Then we go over to Linda flora. Again, it has, one of its characters, it has anthers that are shorter than the filaments. It's generally speaking a smallish plant, at best about 15 centimetres tall. It's not a long aquatic thing, it's just a short little bush. In some cases, when we get into the desert fringes, they come down to 3 leaves and 2 flowers. Again, you can see anthers shorter than the filaments. So if you had that character, someone gave you a pressed specimen, the first thing you do under the microscope is dig out this part here, fold the petals back from it and look. Okay, the anthers are shorter than the filaments. It can only be 2 things, Aquatica or Lindiflora. Then we go into other characters to verify which one of those 2 it is. On an expedition a year ago in the Kimberley, up the main road, Gibb River Road, I came across this Byblis in a population of them that was physically about 20 centimetres tall and wide. But although they're robust, giant plants, they still key out to anthers shorter than the filaments. They are, in all intents and purposes, Lindiflora. It's just a really nice, big, robust population. It's not another species, it's just Lindiflora. And the shot, unfortunately, is coming in this way, so you can't get a measurement, but I can assure you that the anthers are shorter than the filaments. My colleague in Japan, Izo Takei, grows Byblis from my seed collections. He would be the best Byblis grower in the world. He is my colleague and he plays a big part in my research. For example, I'll show you shortly what we do and how we work together and how we can uncover problems. But that one there is that. That's how it lives in the bush. You can go there all day long, year after year after year, and it'll always look like that. But when you put it into cultivation, and I can assure you there's no fertiliser going on that, it's just good water sweetness, a good soil mix, which is his intellectual property. And given all those parameters, these have the genetic code to produce that. So it hasn't been manipulated with chemicals or bonsai or whatever. Here we are at the start of the Kimberley. This little patch down here is Broome itself. And you can see it's been carved out of this area here. This is still bush. but that's broom from the air. When we go northeast of Broome, we go out onto a peninsula surrounded by ocean, which we call the Dampier Peninsula. And this is the typical habitat of one of the new species, Byblis gay-hoai. It's named after a friend of mine by the name of Russell Gay-Hoai, who's French Mauritian. So it's a French name, and the pronunciation is Gay-Hoai. Here's a typical habitat for Gay-Hoai, and here are wild donkeys. These have been let loose back in the 1870s when they're no longer used for transport and carting things, and they're feral animals. They don't seem to do a great deal of damage, but they are really beautiful animals in prime conditions, and some of the colours in their herds are outstanding. But this is a typical patch of nothingness where this Byblis gay-hoai grows. About 30 years ago, a good friend of mine by the name of Sue Geeson, who used to do eco tours taking people into the Kimberley, sent me this rough old postcard photograph that she took, and I looked at it. This is well before I knew about gay-hoai, and I went, "You are not a filifolia, you are not a lindiflora." I scratched my head for probably 25 years. I knew there was something crazy going on, and possibly a new species in the peninsula, but I never came across it. This is a digital picture of a really out of focus print. And then, lo and behold, my good friend Russell Gayho found this. Sent me the photographs, sent me some specimens, said, "What do you think?" I thought, hallelujah, it's Sue's plant. I know it's different. So I jumped on a plane, flew up there, checked it out. Yes, it's different. I'm happy with it. It's widespread on the peninsula, not a problem. So let's go ahead and name the thing. And what better person to name it after is, although Sue Geeson did the first photograph, she didn't give me much in the way of information, but Russ found the plant, sent specimens and did all the hard work, so he deserves to have this named after him. So what is gay-hoai? Well, it's basically a Byblis filifolia complex plant. In other words, at the starting point of the flower department, the anthers are longer than the filaments. But what it's got that the other forms of filifolia haven't got is this ability to branch like crazy. It just comes up as a main stem and most unattractive, then goes all floppo and then starts producing innovations all over the ground. In some cases, if the grasses are tall, it'll send up one stem to the top of those grasses and then produce branching arrangements. The other thing is that it's got a chromosome number of twice of all the filifolias, and in cultivation and even in the field, it seems to have about double the glands in density on their foliage. We use one other seed characteristic, but I'll explain that in a minute. And it's quite variable. The flowers can be small or medium or large. Here is another population between Broome and Derby, which is about 300 kilometres, about the 150k mark. I was lucky enough to find a good, well-distanced, another location of Byblis gay-hoai, and lo and behold, growing alongside of a thing called Lowrie, another Byblis species, which is coming up in a minute. That's a Calendrenia, a Portulaca family. You can see even in the early stages on gay-hoai, all these innovations everywhere, ready to sprout and branch and go crazy, where poor old Lowrie over here, which has a totally different life form, is flowering quite happily on a spindly foliage arrangement. There's a little bit of a close-up, so in the shot you can see all the new innovations arising from the main stem, and that is the habitat for that particular population. This is what we call a boab tree. That is a termite mound. And these are just a few shots of Byblis gayhoei. And as I said before, when they germinate, they're in the early stages. You can see all the innovations trying to come out the bottom here. This is virtually on its first flowering regime, but it's not producing branching plants that it will do if the conditions are to its liking and it's been growing for a good period of time in a good season. Then we move on to raw reader. The anthers are longer than the filaments, so it's in the filifolia complex. But strangely enough, it has this real serrated tip to the petals. That's the first clue that we're looking at something different. And this little collage here is showing you the characters of what constitutes a raw reader, a Byblis raw reader. Number one, you see these cat whisker-like arrangements on the bases of the sepals. And two, you can just see it along the leaves and the new innovations here and on the pedicels, which I'll show you in a close-up in a minute, a dew-like blister cluster. I'll get onto that now, but that will give you an idea of front and back of the same flower, front and back, etc., so that they're the same flower but flipped the other way. But you can see the variation that raw reader produces. So if you're going on flowers alone, well, you're not going to get there. Now, under the microscope, these are these dew-like glands, but they're not sticky. They do not produce any glue. They are simply a waxy-looking blister or bubble in a cluster. What their purpose is, we haven't got a clue. We'll leave that to some student coming along looking for a project to do his PhD on. But they're there, and these are one of the characters, or actually the main character, that we go for raw reader. First thing I do if I get a plant, I go, oh yeah, it's a bit spindly, yes. Oh, look at that, it's got the blisters on it, that's raw reader. And then I'll go further and check out other things. Here's my grandson, Lockie, on our last expedition in March to the Kimberley. We were lucky enough to find an absolutely gorgeous population of big, robust, very floriferous raw readers. And we were lucky enough to get some seed off it. That seed is now getting spread around the world, so all you guys eventually will be able to grow this yourself. It's nothing different other than it's a robust, great cultivar, great plant, great everything, but it's still raw reader. And that's what it looks like in the bush before we remove it for pressing. Another thing I use is not the colour of the petals on the front, but I use the back of the petals. And in this particular case, they're white. So in some cases, we can use the back of the petals as a character. But of course, when they're in the press, you lose that. It's only with fresh material that you can do that. My friend Greg Burke, who's in telecommunications, was in the Derby region, and he came across this, and he found the little blisters on it, and it was confirmed it was raw reader, and I thought, well, it's really gone crazy here with all these serrated petal tips. There's another shot of mine from the same region. And lo and behold, when we put it under magnification, it's got very little, if any, long whiskers on the bases of the sepals. But it has the blister-like glands which make it a raw reader. But it just goes to show, in a distance of 300 kilometres, we've got two forms of raw reader. Taxonomically, they're both the same thing, but you can clearly see this one's trying to become another species, maybe in another million years. And out of the seed from that collection, these were sent to ISO, and an oddball, a cripple, came out of it, but of course we like growing cripples because they're different. This thing is actually trying to produce doubles. It's actually got longitudinal petal additions on every petal. It's quite a nice cultivar. The next trick, of course, is can we get it to F1 and keep it maintained in seed with those characteristics, but Izzo will do that in his breeding program. A lunch stop at Lake Campion, yours truly. We have very large cows in the Kimberley, as you can see by those. This temperature on this day at lunchtime was 45 degrees C. It really saps you. Right. One of the best characters for identifying Byblis from each other is the seed characteristics. The shape of the seed, the surface sculpture, etc. And very quickly, this is Gigantea, but this is Lamellata, and we named it Lamellata because it's got these laminate plates on it. Here's Aquatica, and you can see the differences quite easily. You don't have to be Einstein to see that we're dealing with different shapes. Here we've got Broome, there's the start of the Kimberley. Here we have a big desert region. Here we have a little bit of wet or a little bit moisture area. The reason being is the cyclones come down, whizzing down, and they generally cross the coast at a place called Port Hedland. This is what we call the Pilbara, this area, and this is where all the iron ore is being mined for consumption of the world. And it's in this area here that we were lucky enough to discover a new species of Byblis. This is in publication, if you like, at the moment. Probably the way publications goes these days, this will be official maybe in a month, or it might be official in 2 months, or even a year, we don't know. But the characters of this particular one are, it has long pedicels compared to the foliage in the bush. This is its typical habitat. This is red granite rock, and just the lightest of rain pours produces an aggregation of additional water which flows onto the aprons of the rock, about that line there, and that's where this new species lives. Back here is too dry. This is spinifex country here. This is real semi-arid, but here it's wetter, longer, only because of that rock outcrop. And here's my drawing for the paper. This is one of the specimens for the type material that'll go into herbaria. And the great thing about this one, that's a bit blurry, but John's doing the SEM scanning electron microscope shots where you'll get proper photographs like the ones before. This is just done through my microscope, but it's the tiniest seed of the lot, and it's got a little tiny micropyle on an angle here. That little tip there and that little tip there, and it's the only Byblis seed that's got that little projection on it. Now we don't know whether it's a funicle or it's what else can be, a micropyle. John's examining it under a microscope and he's looking for scars and what have you, and he'll come up with the official name for it. And then the seed is sent to Izzo in Japan, and lo and behold, he's giving it the treatment. And you can see that it's maintaining this huge, long pedicels to the flowers. In most cases, in Byblis, the flowers look out, but the flowers on this one tend to look up, like little helicopter landings. Okay, Byblis species Pilbara, you can see it's generally a more narrow petalled species. Byblis filifolia, up to a very short time ago, this plant, Byblis filifolia, which was named by Mr. Planchon, a Frenchman, many, many moons ago, was put into synonymy under Limniflora. I was lucky enough to borrow this material, have it sent to my herbaria where I examined it, and I found that the anthers were longer than the supporting filaments. So therefore it wasn't a Limniflora, it was the true filifolia. But it's only about 100 mil tall, it's quite small. It wasn't until a fellow botanist of mine, Mishi Meyer, was doing a biological survey for an iron ore mining company, railway line, that she turned these up on the coast in the area where the original collector of filifolia, Benjamin Bino, was. Unfortunately, Benjamin's location data was north-west coast New Holland, even before it was called Australia. So with that new specimen, I saw that they matched. I was happy. At long last, we've got something that looks like this. I managed to salvage, it's in that shot at all, anyway, I managed to salvage a couple of dozen seeds off that specimen, sent them to ISO, and this is the early stages, the flower, and the finished product. But you will never ever see that in the wild. You will only ever see sticks, crummy, crappy, Byblis filifolia in the field. Give it some good conditions, here we are. That means that every Byblis in the Kimberley across the top of Australia is not filifolia. It's related to filifolia, so they are potentially new species. And I'll just run through a few of them here. This one has yellow backs with maroon wine stains along the edges. Oh. This is about 1.5 kilometres, about 1.5 metres long, and well, I've got yum on here, but our traditional Aboriginal people, if they came across one of these, it was a feast, and they tell me that when they're cooked, etc., that they're sort of a fishy, chickeny type flavour, but this was one of the animals that actually sustained Aboriginal man before we came along and colonised the place. Again, another type of filifolia that I've got to work on with white backs and serrated tips. One from Bell Gorge, an oddball seed, produced a white one which we're maintaining, but that is you rarely see a white one out there. Another one from Feeder Station, Cattle Station, where it's about 20 centimetres tall. The flower is huge. It's sort of pinkish on the back. You can see the filaments are shorter than the anthers. This is it in cultivation. And this is a combination of flowers just to show you the variation in the pinkiness that is on the back of the two clones. You can draw a line down there, clone F59 and UN11. This is one I've only found once at Honeymoon Beach in the Kimberley, and it's got these beautiful maroon stripes on the back, so this is one I've got to work on as well, but I need to go back to the Kimberley to do it. Typical hand-sized spiders, you're always walking into them. On our last expedition, Lockie and myself found this one in the Wangi region in the Northern Territory, and it's a really floriferous species, and it grows near Wangi waterfalls, and it's 45 degrees in a water bag, and you want to go for a swim, but you don't because it's full of saltwater crocodiles there. And this is one that's come out of an area from Bino Harbour in the Northern Territory. It's a fleshy arrangement, and you could actually, if you cut it or sunk your teeth into it, you'd actually leave the bite mark. It's really got fleshy petals on it with a white back. Typical Northern Territory region, sandstone uprises. This is from a film photo. Unfortunately, it doesn't carry over nice and crisp into the digital. But from this collection here that I made of that plant, and in cultivation it's got a huge flower on it, all of these hybrids between the filifolia complex, we've produced all these. There's 7 plants in each one of these large containers. That there is the one from Bell Gorge. And this is the colour range that he has established, and he can breed these he knows the combinations of this clone with this clone will produce that, and so on and so forth. So the good thing about it, he doesn't have to go for plant breeding rights or what have you, because if you've got one of these white species, you can pollinate it all day long, you'll get seed, but they'll probably all come out pink. And this is some of the breeding stock we've got up in Japan to experiment with. And the interesting thing on the white flowered filifolias, the seed is white, whereas in all other cases, all Byblis are a charcoal black. And here you can see that we've got the early stages to 39 days, I think it is, to the first flower at 59 days. Here you can see a typical filifolia gang. This here is a gay Hawaii patch. That 59 days has been beaten by a friend of mine, Bob Browning, in Queensland, who grew a Rawreda from seed to flower in 43 days. So they're very, very fast. Here are some of the clones that we're actually working with and producing the hybrids from. You can see that clone 37 and F06 makes that. But they're all essentially filifolias. And that is what it's all about. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take some quick questions. How are we going for time, Marcel?
5 or 10 minutes for questions.
Cool, okay. Anyone? Yes?
In cultivation, you need to use something to get the seed going.
Yes, gibberellic acid.
Gibberellic acid,
But we found with the
fire and
gibberellic...
habitat?
Sorry?
Do they get regular fire and habitat, or why do we need
They do. Fire is a normal, natural regime of Australia. But the thing with natural fires in the Kimberley, they're started by lightning strikes in the build-up, and the fuel load is generally small, and they have cool burns where the fires very rapidly go over the ground. But the fire does induce all the carnivorous plant species into germination. With Byblis gigantea down where I live, you'll get no germination unless a fire's been through pre-summer. But in cultivation, we can get them all going with gibberellic acid, which is available in pill, powder and liquid, and I found that the liquid for me works better than the powders, etc. But it's at a rate of 10 mils of liquid GA3 to 1 litre of water. Soak for 24 hours and sow, and you get germination every time. You want this? Yes.
Question. You mentioned in cultivation that you can make hybrids between the different filifolia. Have you seen in the wild any hybrids between Rawreda and...
Never. No. We have situations where we have, for instance, gay Hawaii growing with Rawreda. You look and you can't find any intermediates between them. In other parts, I can find filifolia growing with Lindiflora side by side, no intermediates, which suggests that they're genetically isolated from each other. Indeed, our breeding experiments, we're finding some of them hit an end with no seed set whatsoever. And in some cases, the seed produced is 1 or 2 seeds, which in the wild, if that happened, would be wiped out quick smart. But we've got control, so we can take those 1 or 2 seeds and produce a nice white one. But it's the abnormal, not the normal.
So in cultivation you have made hybrids between the different species?
No, we can't do it.
Okay.
And all the other guys, I saw a report, some guys in Germany and England had a go at it, and they were getting no seed set, no seed set, no seed set. So there is a big genetic barrier between the two, or between the species, which is great, because it means we're dealing with species. But the big headache now is the filifolia complex, and there's about 6 or 7 in there to sort out. Anyone else?
I've grown in for and rolled in cultivation. If you don't change the cultivation, you keep them back and keep them on the light and keep them going for a year. Is that the same with cultivation?
Yes, I had a gay Hawaii go out to around about the 18 months, 17 months, no problems, and then just gave up the ghost, said I've had enough. But normally in the field, it would probably be around for no more than 4 or 5 months as a lush plant, and then from there it just looks like crap and it takes a dive. Sorry?
They look pretty crappy when they're really cooking.
Oh, yeah. But this is the nature of the beast. All they're interested in is putting a flower out, attracting a pollinator, making seed, throwing it on the ground and ensuring that they can get from this season to the next season. Anyone else?
Is there more known about the Byblis from New Guinea?
No. We don't know whether it's in the filifolia gang, i.e. the anthers longer than the supporting filaments, or it's a limniflora. At this stage it's been shoved in the limniflora files up in New Guinea herbaria. But to get stuff out of New Guinea is hard. We've got a real weird bureaucracy there. The other problem is I'm not going to New Guinea because I can't duck spears like I used to. They are out of control up there. They're called rascals and you can get mugged and you can get killed. Anyone else? Thank you.